بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أوآباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Inshallah, before we begin the program, I would like to welcome Brother Ali Rida Baidoon for a recitation of the Holy Quran. Please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
رحم الله من أعاد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد خلقنا الإنسان ونعلم ما توسوس به نفسه ونحن أقرب إليه من حبل الوريد. إذ يتلقى المتلقيان عن اليمين وعن الشمال قعيد. ما يلفظ من قول إلا لديه رقيب عتيد. ذلك ما كنت منه تحيد. ونفخ في الصور ذلك يوم الوعيد. وجاءت كل نفس معها سائق وشهيد. لقد كنت في غفلة من هذا لقد كنت في غفلة من هذا فكشفنا عنك غطاءك فبصرك اليوم حديد. وقال قرينه هذا ما ألقيا في جهنم كل كفار عنيد ألقيا في جهنم كل كفار عنيد مناع للخير معتد مريب الذي جعل مع الله إلها آخر الذي جعل مع الله إلها آخر فألقياه في العذاب الشديد صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome everyone once again to the Hadi Institute Youth Community Center. Inshallah, before we begin, just a few announcements. For the first 2 weeks of Ramadan, our nightly lectures will be held every Friday through Thursday. Inshallah, tonight will be the final night for this week, and inshallah, we'll see you on Friday next week. Please stay tuned for any upcoming programming through our WhatsApp, social media channels on Instagram, Facebook. And any attendees and volunteers are requested to keep their masks on at all times and just stay wary of the social distancing precautions put in place. And inshallah, without further ado, I would like to welcome Shk Usama Abdul Ghani with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to our 3rd edition. The lecture series this year is called The Transition. And what we've started with this year is the barzakh, our beginning or our initial stage as we transfer from this world into our final abode. Where we left off yesterday was talking about the questioning, or as I was calling it, the interrogation of the angels, which was something very, very serious. And then now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting off with the squeeze in the grave. So remember, brothers and sisters, they said there was 3 things that take place for us inside the grave. One of them was the interrogation. Secondly was that pressure of the grave. Again, these are assuming that we haven't done enough to be able to ward these things off. And then finally was seeing or witnessing our actions when we watch them take on a corporal form. So of course, each one of those things by themselves, it would be too much. But then to have all three of them come in together is a bit much for the soul, for the ruh, and the person really is under extreme pressure. Again, when you look at the ahadith, I mentioned this yesterday, the idea of these happening in real time, as opposed to you and I kind of breaking it down, making it something academic where we can go over, okay, this happens and this happens. The idea of this all happening all of a sudden and then at the same time, for instance, because we're told that the questioning takes place while we're being crushed in the grave. So this is hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, Yus'alu wa huwa madghut. So with the crushing of the grave, at that same time, then you have the angels who, as it was mentioned in some of the ahadith, that their eyes are flashing like thunder. They're rapid fire questions. And these aren't questions that you and I can answer like you memorize for a test. These are our beliefs. And then what's at stake is paradise or hell. So then all of that pressure is on that person. Now what we'd like to talk about a little bit is the idea of the squeeze in the grave. If we can, we want to talk about some of the things that you and I can do in this world to alleviate this. What are things that we could do? What are things the Ahlul Bayt mentioned? That of all of the sins, all of the bad things that someone could do, there are certain, we're going to mention about 6 or maybe 7 of them, things that the Ahlul Bayt said, these definitely should be avoided. These have a direct connection with that squeezing in the grave. After that, then we want to move on to the actions taking the corporal form. So, inshallah, we'll kind of see if we can wrap all of that up today, but we'll begin with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajum. If you look at some of the ahadith, it seems that almost everybody gets a taste of the squeezing in the grave. But then I'm going to mention another hadith from Imam Sadiq that again gives us hope that if we're able to take care of certain things, maybe we can avoid it. Let's see. Let's look at the hadith. The first one says this, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِن مُؤْمِنٍ إِلَّا وَلَهُ ضَمَّةٌ. There is no believer, the first hadith, there is no believer except that this person will be crushed in the grave. To what extent? Allahu A'lam. On the other side, though, we do have that hopeful hadith from the Imam where he tells us, the man was asking, he said, well, all those wonderful things, again it was Abu Basir, if all of those wonderful things that you described take place, what about the getting squeezed in the grave? And the Imam said, Hayhat, ma ala al-mu'minina minha shay'un. Mu'mineen don't have any of that. So the levels of Iman are different, but it's something that's definitely to be there. It is definitely one of those things that's a mention. Now, there are certain things that the Ahlul Bayt have said cause this, meaning out of all of the sins, because I mean, obviously, our chance in this world is to, first of all, make tawbah. This is the month of Ramadan. If there's something that we've done, let's make up for it. Why wait to face these things? Why have it be, as it's mentioned in some of the ahadith, it's kafara. Why go into the next world with a kafara, with sins that I haven't made up for? It's better to take care of it here. But what are some of the sins, some of the problems, the issues, the spiritual diseases that the Ahlul Bayt have said, if you have these, then this is something that's really we need to be concerned about. The first one is called taking the prayer lightly. This is different than abandoning prayer. Some people just don't pray. It's just, the Imam is there, inshallah, he'll save me, the love of the Ahlul Bayt. But there's other people who know they do that, but then the prayer for them just isn't that serious. If I pray it late, if I pray it on time, it's not a biggie. I don't place importance on the prayer, which is something that we see that our ulama have warned us about. So Lady Fatima asked her father, what happens to the person who takes prayer lightly? Again, as I said, this is different from the person, the hadith, the other said, the person who just abandons prayer, that's kufr. What about the person, Ya abata, ma liman tahawana bisalatihi min ar-rijal wan nisa. For those men and women who don't take the prayer quite as seriously as they should, what happens to those people? The Prophet explained that there were actually 15 punishments, but 3 of them are related to our discussion. One of them is that Allah will set an angel on this person to torture and torment the person in the grave. This is one of the ways of the person being purified. There will be an angel to deal with that person in the grave. The second one he mentions, وَيُضَيَّقُ عَلَيْهِ قَبْرُهُ. The grave this person will be under a lot of pressure from the grave. And the third one is that instead of the grave being light, remember we talked about the good mu'min, how the grave will be expanded, the door from heaven. This person who takes the prayer lightly will find that the grave is very dark. Another one that's mentioned, number 2, are those people who don't take the rules of tahara and najasa seriously. Now, again, this doesn't mean falling into the trap of waswas, which is a sin. That's a sin. So we're not talking about going above and beyond. The Ahlul Bayt have said, consider this tahir. We consider it tahir. It's a sin to act on waswas. We're not talking about that. But there's some people who it's just not that important. It's clean. Who cares? The rules. And you see that sometimes. That's actually one of those things that can lead to the squeezing in the grave. The third one is actually really important. In some of the hadith, it says a third of the squeezing and the pressure in the grave comes from this third one. And that is ghiba, backbiting. I don't know how many of us remember when we read the statement of Imam Khomeini. I mean, not the statement. Many of us have probably read the 40 hadith, and there's beautiful discussions over there. One of the discussions is about the concept of ghiba. This hadith was the first time I saw this hadith was over there, where he quotes, this is a hadith from Imam Ali. It says, "Ijtanib al-ghiba," avoid backbiting, stay away from it, don't do it. Because remember, in Islam, listening to ghiba is also a sin. So one time, God forbid, I'm the person who will talk about others. And of course, there are some exceptions. When is it allowed? We need to find that. Like any other rule, when is it allowed for me? When is someone allowed to do ghiba? But let's say it's one of the cases where I'm not actually backbiting, but I'm listening when somebody else does it. And I don't defend the person. Because if you look in the rulings, they say that either you try and say, no, inshallah, that's not the case. But sometimes the way the person's explained, there's no way to say that that didn't happen. Then you again say something like, well, people can make mistakes, somehow defending the person that, but let's say somebody didn't do that. The Imam says, he says, avoid backbiting. He says it's part of it's the food of the dogs of hell. Inshallah, when I go a little bit further into the actions taking on a corporal form, you'll see what that means. But in the meantime, one of those that's to really be avoided is backbiting. Another one that you'll find is very serious, and it can out or undo a lot of our good deeds, is if we are not the most pleasant of people to be around in our homes. So it might be that the story that I'm about to share is about a father. He was a father, and unfortunately, his akhlaq was not the best in the home. But it might be a son, a daughter, a sibling, people who are working closely with another group of people. And what's so interesting is sometimes you'll find that the person's oblivious to how others feel from them. It's hard to even correct a person sometimes because I don't see how toxic of a person I am. There was one time when at least I know that, look, that's an area that needs to be addressed. I'm not very pleasant to be around. I'm not a pleasure to talk to. It's not easy to hang out with me. I make life hard. People walk on eggshells around me. But you'll find sometimes a person doesn't even know. Now, the story that's shared and the thing, and it just makes us, again, so concerned, is because the person who unfortunately had this, and we all got to learn this lesson, was one of the great companions of the Prophet. To the extent that some of the researchers said that if he was alive at the time of Saqifa, he would have been one of those people who would have turned the tides. He was that kind of a strong companion. And of course, when he died, the Prophet took care of the burial rituals himself. He was walking with escorting the body. The Prophet didn't have the abba on or the cloak on, he didn't have shoes on, he's walking barefoot, then not only that, he would put his hand on different areas as they're carrying the body. The Prophet's moving his hand to one side, the Prophet's moving his hand to the other side. After that, then the Prophet, the burial rituals, all these things, the Prophet over there smoothing out the grave. And then after that, his mom was so happy about it. She was like, Ya Sa'd, haniyan lakal jannah. Just watch what the Prophet did. Your place is in paradise. And right there, the Prophet stopped her. He said, Sa'd, don't make a rule for God. Don't say something definite's going to happen. Right now, Sa'd got that squeeze. The believers, they waited till everything ended. Then they came to the Prophet and they asked him, they said, well, what did we just see? We see you walking. He said, well, there were so many angels. He had told them 70,000 angels. Hand on the right side, hand on the left side. That was Angel Jibreel. My hand was in his hand. You did all of these things. And then after that, the grief, then the Prophet said the sentence, Naam, innahu kana fi khulqihi ma ahlihi su'a. Unfortunately, he wasn't the easiest person to get along with at home. So, as I said, if it can outdo somebody who was at that low. I mean, the poor guy, the reason he died was he was hit with an arrow, and then finally he bled out, and he died, and then he went back to meet Allah. But still, that didn't counsel out how he mistreated people. He's just mean. And some people are like that. Very good Muslim, makes salat, pays zakat, do so many good, but I'm just mean. Words are harsh, not a pleasure to be around. Another one that again is mentioned in the ahadith, and one of the things that it causes is if in the intimate relation, this is for a married person, the person kind of starves their spouse in the intimate relationship. That person is under pressure in this world. They're a mu'min or mu'minah. I'm not taking care of that. How it shows up in the next world, the person who starves the spouse in the intimate relationship is in the punishment in the grave. So that's another one. So now, these are some of the things that were mentioned. Of course, the general principle is the idea of tawbah before the month of Ramadan, tawbah during the month of Ramadan, changing the akhlaq, bettering oneself, staying away from those sins, asking for forgiveness. But in addition to those things, the main wajibat, the idea of purifying the soul, is there anything special that you and I could do to try and make sure that we don't get tortured in the grave? There is one thing that's mentioned, and it's very, very special if we can do that, and that is to perform, and inshallah we'll get to do that. Let's see what happens with Corona, to be able to do the ziyarah of Imam Hussein. If we can make it, to actually perform the ziyarah of Imam Hussein. In the hadith of Imam Baqir, he says that if people knew what was in the fadl, the merit of doing ziyarah of Imam Hussein, he says, lamatu shawqan. They would have died just longing for this opportunity. So, what happens if we're able, I'll just give you, because the hadith is pretty long, but there's many things that are mentioned. One of the things that's mentioned in the hadith is this. If you die in the year in which you perform ziyarah of Imam Hussein, then out of the things that happen, one of the things is that the angels of rahmah are present when you're buried. When you're dying, they're present. They're present when you're shrouded and you're getting the ghusl. They're reciting istighfar for you, but not only that, they escort you to your grave. Then, after that, when they're escorting you to your grave, one of the things that's mentioned is, the grave becomes expansive as far as the eye can see. But then one of the promises is that Allah will make you free from two things. One of them will be free from the squeezing of the grave, and the other one is the interrogation of Nakir and Munkar. One of our urafa, he actually happened to be going to the graveyard. And when he went to the graveyard, he went with some of his friends, some of the people who were close to him, he went. When he went to the graveyard, then he just smelled this wonderful scent, otherworldly. He asked those who were with him, he's like, do you smell anything? He went to the caretaker of the graveyard, and he asked him, he's like, was somebody buried here? He said, yesterday, yes, just now there was a person who was buried, and he led the small group over there to the graveyard of that person. When they came over there to the graveyard of that person, some of those who were with the Arif were also able to smell the wonderful scent. And then he explained the secret. He said, this man was a lover of Imam Hussein. He was someone who would perform that ziyarah of the Imam. When he died, the Imam came to see him. That scent was from the Imam. And because of this individual, the punishment was lifted from the grave, even of those who were around him. So one of the things that we can do to try and take advantage of being Shia is, inshallah, at least make the niyyah of trying to go over and visit the Imam. Now, the next thing we want to talk a little bit about is the idea of our actions taking on a corporal form. This is another definite article of faith. Many ayat of the Quran, many ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, that the actions that we do, as I mentioned it yesterday, the idea that we are guest and host. When we die, we're the guest, but we're also the host because it was our actions or what we're going to see on the other side. So maybe we read this from Surah Yasin, وَلَا تُجْزَوْنَ إِلَّا مَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. Surah 36, verse number 54. And you will not be punished, or you will not see anything except what you did. There's no jaza except what we did. Or we have in some ahadith where it says that paradise is this field, this plain, you could say. But what plants the trees are our dhikr, our words, what we're doing. We're building our own paradise. Once the Prophet wanted to teach this concept to one of his companions, a man named Qis. So he told Qis, he said that, Qis, you have a companion, and you're going to be buried with him. He'll be alive, but you'll be dead. If he's noble, he'll take care of you and he'll honor you. But if he's evil and low, he'll leave you to your own devices. He'll be raised with you, and you'll only be asked about him. Make sure he's righteous. If he is, you'll be comforted by his presence. If he's evil, the only reason you have to be fearful is him. And that person is your actions. وَهُوَ فِعْلُكَ. So in the hereafter, you and I, why be afraid of anything? Why not take care of it here? The good deeds that we're doing here, they count over there. Why be terrified, paralyzed? Let's take care of it. So one of our greats is, and maybe you've heard his name, a man named Shk Baha'i. One of our greats. Even when it came to the building, the shrine of Imam, or some intricate things about the shrine of Imam Hussein, Imam Rida alayhi salam, Shk Baha'i. Anyhow, one of our greats. So what happens is that he had a friend who would go often and visit the graveyard. He asked his friend once, he said that, did you ever see anything like incredible in the grave? His friend used to go there. He would ponder over death. He said, actually, I did. He said, just the other day, I was in the graveyard, and then I smelled this wonderful smell, unlike anything I've smelled in this world. It was so pleasant. He said it was so amazing that I started looking around the graveyard to see where is this scent coming from. He said, and then suddenly I saw this handsome young man wearing the nicest outfit walk over. There was a grave that had been just dug. It had been dug, was recently dug. They had buried someone. He walked over to that grave and then he disappeared. He said, and then after that, I smelled a stench that I had never smelled. I look over, it's a dog. The stench, the otherworldly stench is coming from that animal. It also went to the grave and then it entered inside the grave. So I was just sitting there in amazement. What just happened? What did I see? He said, when suddenly I see the young man come out of the grave. But he doesn't look like how he looked when he went in. He's bloody, he's battered, he's wounded, he's leaving. So I go over to catch up to him. I run up to him. What happened? The person says, I was the good deeds of the man who just got buried. The plan was that I would be in his grave and I would accompany him. He said, but the animal you saw, that dog that you saw, that was his sins. And because his sins are stronger, he had done more, he was more wickedness, the dog overpowered me. He said, so now my job is to leave. I'm leaving until he gets purified. Once he gets purified, I'll be back. So Sheikh Baha'i, he explains, he said that was actually a true spiritual disclosure. Because this concept of seeing our actions take on the corporal, it's an article of faith. Ayat of the Quran, hadith. وَوَجَدُوا مَا عَمِلُوا حَاضِرًا. They will find that which they did present. What they did. وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. God's not an oppressor to anybody. The believers, that's them, that's it. So what happens is, obviously, the sins, those are what we want to avoid. The whole idea of coming in the month of Ramadan, of giving ourselves this hardship, istighfar, dua, is to avoid the sins. Because when things take on that corporal form, in the hereafter, it's going to be hideous. Meaning, in some of the ahadith, the Prophet has said that pigs and apes will look beautiful compared to some individuals. The form that people will take, the akhlaq of the person, the form that it takes, it's going to be incredible over there. Again, with these stories of the Urafa, one of the Urafa happened to be present when a man was burying his wife. One of his friends is burying his wife. As he was burying his wife, then suddenly the Arif turns to the guy and he starts asking him about the state of his wife. And the guy's like, oh, she's dead. He said, no. Right now, you don't know it. You can't see it. Your wife is screaming for help. She's begging you to forgive her. What happened? There was a large dog about to enter the grave with her. She was, unfortunately, the akhlaq in the home wasn't the greatest. Toxic environment, unpleasant to be around. Now she was about to get it. And then the man, after that, he ended up asking Allah, forgiving her, and she was able to make it, alhamdulillah. So now, but what we're looking for, of course, are the good deeds. There's some good deeds that we can do, and we're told that if we do these different good deeds, meaning all of the good deeds that we're doing, especially the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt, that's the greatest of our actions. But all of the good deeds that we have, they take on that corporal form. And we'll see them over there. So it's mentioned in our hadith that when the believer dies, well, actually, the way that it goes is like this. It says that whenever you do good to someone, you make someone happy. Right? Because maybe brothers and sisters remember me sharing some things about this, that you do something, let's say for your spouse, your children, the people you're interacting with, and something's really make the believer happy. They call it surur. That happiness that you put in the heart of another believer, that shows up on the Day of Judgment. Actually, it shows up as soon as you die. It enters the grave with you. And then from the very beginning, it's encouraging you, giving you good tidings, telling you everything is going to be okay. It's there with you in the grave, even when you're raised. Then again, it's with you, giving you the good tidings. So as it's accompanying you on your journey, one of the things that's said is that the believer will actually ask, well, who are you? And then the person identifies themselves and they say that actually I'm that happiness that you put in the heart of such and such believer. So all of the deeds that we do, we don't want to count any deed that we could be doing as small or unimportant. This doesn't make any difference. Something like that even is something that will be accompanying us, and we'll see it on the other side. The last hadith is one that, again, makes you and I lucky to know who we are as followers of the Ahlul Bayt. And one of the things about this discussion about the hereafter is that we get a chance to know a bit more of who the Ahlul Bayt are and how important they are and how lucky we are to have them as followers, to have them as our imams and to be their followers. So what happens is this hadith says that when you die, إِذَا مَاتَ الْعَبْدُ الْمُؤْمِنِ, so when a mu'min dies, دَخَلَ فِي قَبْرِهِ سِتَّةُ صُوَرٍ. There are 6 forms, 6 beautiful forms that enter into your grave with you. One of them, though, is more beautiful than the others, more well put together, more attractive, smells more pleasant than all of the other forms that are there. That one, that beautiful form, asks the others to identify. Oh, by the way, it says that each one of them is warding off dangers from you in the grave. The most beautiful one, the most handsome of them, tell the others, may Allah reward you on my behalf. Identify yourselves. Who are you? So the one on the right says that I am Salah. The one on the left, I am Zakah. The one behind you, Hajj and Umrah. The one in front of you, they go through each one of these things. The one who is by the feet, so the one who's in front will say, I'm your fasting for the month of Ramadan. The one who's by the feet will say, I'm your kindness to other believers. And then they ask, well, who are you? The one that was the most beautiful, the most attractive. And that person says, Ana al-wilayatu li Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ali Muhammad. So Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So of course, our belief and our actions, each one of these things is important, our prayer, our fasting, but the greatest of all of them, the greatest gift that Allah has granted us is that we are attached to this family. And some of the ahadith, it's mentioned this is from Imam Sadiq, and one hadith it says that the person will be asked, remember we said that when you're first interrogated in the grave, it's about those main beliefs and then certain main core actions. So it says, يُسْأَلُ الْمَيِّتْ فِي قَبْرِهِ عَنْ خَمْسٍ. He'll be asked about 5 things. عن صلاته وزكاته وحجه وصيامه وولايته. Right? You'll be asked about the salah, the prayer, these things, but they'll also be asked about the wilayah. And then the wilayah will speak on behalf of the others and say, wherever you were flawed, then it's on me to fix it. So inshallah, we ask Allah to help us die with the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, and to be raised with them on the last day. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you, Sheikh, for that wonderful, insightful lecture. Inshallah, we will see you all on Friday, next week, inshallah. With that, we will end with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة. إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين يطوف عليهم ولدان